So welcome to this particular session. And we wish to continue with session 4, which is literature and politics. We hope that Sheila will be able to join us. She's having connectivity issues. That we need to follow up so that she signs that attendance. So literature and politics for session 4. We want to focus on literature and politics. So this session explores the intricate relationship between African literature and political identity, tracing the evolution from early 20th century Pan-Africanist movement to modern Afropolitanism. So there is a nexus between literature and politics, and there are two major theories here. We have Pan-Africanism and Afropolitanism. These are just among the few theories where literature intersects with politics. So we begin by examining Du Bois, whose social-political activism and seminal writings laid the ideological foundation for global African consciousness, asserting that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of color line. That the major problem facing the United States, according to Du Bois, is color line. There is nothing else. And actually, he wrote in the book called The Souls of the Black Folk, which was published around 1901. Yeah, if I'm not wrong. So the dialogue then shifts to Achille Mbembe, the concept of Afropolitanism, which reclaims the African experience as a transnational, pluralistic identity rooted in mobility and urbanity. So Afropolitanism is believed to be an improvement of Pan-Africanism, but a critical look at the two theories, you will discover that they are not the same. They're actually very different. But these are the two canons that enable us to intersect, literature to intersect with the politics. There is a nexus between literature and politics. So finally, we analyze these theoretical frameworks through Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's Americanah. And remember, I've also shared with you two course outlines, and these course outlines have the co-reading texts, the ones I shared recently. I hope you have seen them. You will now see the text you need, especially for your final exam. So we move on. So here, laws 1, evaluate W.E.B. Du Bois, Fanon, César, and Garvey's contribution to global African consciousness, specifically focusing on how his concept of color line established a framework for the 20th century African political identity. Number 2, differentiate between traditional and contemporary identities, and then contrast the sociopolitical activism of the early 20th century Pan-Africanism with Achille Mbembe's modern concept of Afropolitanism. And it's not just Achille Mbembe. We also have Selassie. We also have Taye Selassie, one of the founders of Afropolitanism. Then apply theoretical frameworks to literary narrative, critically examining how Chimamanda Ngozi uses the protagonist Ifemelu in Americanah to dramatize theoretical concepts of race, diaspora, and the politics of belonging. I don't know if you have prepared your presentations. Once I finish, one of you should be able to tell me about the presentation. Did I give you any presentation on Proverbs, or that is for tomorrow? Or for this unit, I've not given you any assignment so far. Did I give you any assignment? Yeah, I need to give you one so that you start making presentations. But tomorrow, ensure you present the one on Proverbs, and then next week you must make one presentation based on cell 801. So Du Bois. So maybe before I continue, what do you know about Du Bois? Any information you have on Du Bois? Let's begin with Sheila. What do you know about Du Bois? What do you know about Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois? Sheila? Okay, Sheila is lost. Felix? What do you know about Du
Please,
Bois?
I will not read much about him,
Hmm.
but like, how can I say it? I've heard of him several times, yes, but I've not read much about to study much about him. So as for now, I'm not in a position to
All
present
right.
some facts, yes,
All right.
about him.
Hmm. All right. With Sheila now. Sheila's had connectivity issues. Hmm. Had connectivity issues. Yeah, so I'm happy to know that. That's why you are learning. That's why you are learning. So literature is not just literature is a mirror of society, and it is not just concerned with social issues. Literature is also concerned about politics, and it intersects with politics to a great extent. Now, Du Bois um, was the first black person to get a PhD. Yeah, that's the picture of Du Bois. He was the first black person to get a PhD. And this was a great achievement because most Europeans argued that Africans did not have enough intelligence, to achieve such high levels of knowledge, to attain such high levels of knowledge. And he lived in the United States. And so so after getting the PhD, Du Bois was very much concerned about the life of Black people, the condition of Black people. Um, and he began the dream of Pan-Africanism, championing the Pan-Africanist dream, trying to enlighten Black people and enabling Black people to get education so that they champion for independence in African nations. And so is considered one of the fathers of Pan-Africanism. But one thing you must know about Du Bois is that he was the center and the spirit of Harlem Renaissance. Yeah? This was a period when there was a revolution in art in the United States around 1920. Very many poets like Claude McKay arose in the US, like Langston Hughes, arose in the United States, and most of the content of their poems was political. There is a poem called "I Shall Return," and then "If I Must Die," yeah, then "Let Me Die Nobly," yeah. So that is by Claude McKay, and the contents of these poems, was very political, and Black people wrote against racism. There's even a poem by Langston Hughes about I too am. He talks about I'm the darker brother. Yeah. I'm also I too am American. Yeah. And the story says that Black Americans are also Americans. And he says he stays in the kitchen, but when visitors come, he also moves to the living room to show off his what? His Americanness. And although he's Black, the persona is also American. So the Harlem Renaissance was a season of revival which later now influenced the civil rights movement of the 1940 under Luther King and Richard Wright, who wrote Native Son. Yeah. And so the content of the literature at this time was inspired by the political ideas of Du Bois. And the spirit was the spirit of Pan-Africanism, the spirit of Pan-Africanism. So, Sheila, we were talking about who Du Bois is before you went out, and Felix says he does not have a lot of information about him. And so I'm trying to explain who Du Bois was. So when you talk about Pan-Africanism and later even the fight for independence, Du Bois played a very important role in inspiring independence movements. Yeah. So he was the first African scholar. That's what we are saying. This was the first African scholar, the first person to get a PhD, and he wrote a number of books, one of which we will talk about today. Yeah. So Du Bois argued that in a world defined by color line, African art must serve as propaganda. So for Du Bois, yeah, literature is propaganda. So whenever we talk up from now on, when you hear me saying literature is propaganda, I'm citing Du Bois. Yeah, it is Du Bois who argued that literature must have some ideology underlying it, so that we do what? Yeah, so that we influence the audience towards a certain goal. That all writers must take sides. All writers must have some ideology upon which, yeah, to write their work and persuade the audience to certain standpoints. So for Du Bois, literature was a weapon to combat racism, yeah, against Black people and the erasure of African civilization. It was a weapon to fight the erasure of African civilization. Yeah. So literature and politics are related. And one important scholar here is W.E.B. Du Bois. So Felix, as an upcoming scholar, don't forget, yeah, the fathers who laid our foundation at master's level. These are the people you need to know, so that even as you get knowledge, don't forget people like Du Bois, Frantz Fanon, and others we are going to mention in this particular lecture. But I always begin with Du Bois, and I think Sheila, because I think I taught Sheila Afro-American literature. So she knows Du Bois a great deal, although she's having connectivity problems. But I know, but Sheila, you need to strive and start marking that attendance, because you have attended so many lessons, and you see, when we audit the attendance, you have not signed any. And so you need today, you should talk to Felix so that he guides you to fill that attendance. We want you to be well. We want to do the right thing. We want to do the right thing. Um, so um, so Du Bois, yeah, is a very important scholar. It's a very, very important scholar. Let me just do something here before we continue. And you see, he's related to literature. He's related to literature. I'm not just teaching you things, eh? Why? One, he says literature is propaganda, because literature, African literature, for example, should combat, any politics that tries to erase African civilization. So literature is not just art for art's sake, the way we found. I think there was a philosopher who talked about art for art's sake. Du Bois is against that. So he advocated for a monologic approach. I think in one of these units, I will teach you. Yeah, I think from next week, I will teach you monologism. Yeah, that literature must have a monologic approach. That is, you need to bring down a certain ideal. Eh? That to some extent is saying literature should be preachy. Yeah, it needs some ideology to bring down to the audience, and this will enable Black writers to prioritize stifling white narratives to center the Black reality. So this intellectual revolution was to be led by talented tenth, yeah, and so he came up with a tenet called talented tenth. And what is talented tenth to Du Bois? Yeah, it is an educated elite, tasked with the academic and political upliftment of the masses, that every society needs intellectuals, and these intellectuals should assist, yeah, in uplifting the political, economic, and intellectual ability of the masses. eh? So Du Bois believed that every society must have an intellectual class of people, yeah, who should be able to influence the masses, especially Africans, towards proper goals. So this was criticized, but that was one of his tenets. So that's the picture of Du Bois. So his first book was called The Souls of the Black Folk, and he came up with a number of tenets. One is double consciousness. So according to Du Bois, um, there is an element of two-ness among Black Americans. He describes it as are always looking at oneself through the eyes of the world that views you with amused contempt and pity. That black people look at themselves first through their own eyes and then through the eyes of the oppressor. So you are a Felix, yes, but you are also black and ugly because you are the way you are described by the white supremacists. So that black people suffer double consciousness because they look at themselves twice. First, through their own, through their own eyes, and then two, through the eyes of the oppressor. And this double consciousness therefore causes a lot of problems among black people. Number two, the problem of color line. Du Bois asserted that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of color line. This is the first chapter of the Souls of the Black Folk. I will also share this book. You read a few chapters, you need to know. You need to know. But I know somebody like Sheila. I know you read it at undergraduate, but you also need to remind yourselves, yeah, especially the question of literature as propaganda. And he's the one who emphasized that African literature cannot just be about beauty and aesthetics, as some philosophers argue, that African literature must serve a purpose. And one of the greatest purposes is to bring down an ideology that fights white supremacism or supremacists, yeah, or white racism. So the problem of color line. So he was against racism, and literature must address that. Number three, the talented 10th. Du Bois argued that the black race will be saved by its exceptional men and women, of course. So he believed in developing the leadership capacity of the top 10% of black people through classical higher education in the humanities, so they would guide the masses away from contamination and death. And you can see he was very particular about the humanities, that the humanities are the ones that have the ability to shape leaders so that when they take charge, they are able to lead people the right way. So he believed so much in the humanities. And that's why when he took people like Kwame Nkrumah, like Jomo Kenyatta, he enabled them to get scholarships so that they learn the humanities and come back to lead Africa to independence. And in the 1960s, when the Africans started getting independence, Du Bois was very happy because his vision was being fulfilled. And at the end, he moved to Ghana, where he died in 1963. Then opposition to the Atlanta Compromise. Du Bois stood against Booker Washington, and this is what I think we learned at undergraduate for those whom I taught here. So he opposed Booker Washington. Booker Washington focused so much on industrial education, and Du Bois said, no, it's academic education that creates leaders. That if we just go into this industrial education and so on, we'll just be providing labor for the white farmers and industrialists and white racists in the United States. But when black people get academic education, they will be able to influence politics, and the politics controls everything. And so by 1920, most people in the United States, the black people, they moved away from Booker Washington and they adopted the ideas of Du Bois, which led to the Harlem Renaissance between 1920 and 1930. And this culminated into the civil rights movement by Luther King and Richard Wright. And through that, black people started getting rights to vote. And that is how we ended up with people like Barack Obama, because of the contribution of W.E.B. Du Bois. So this is somebody we cannot ignore, and especially when we are looking at the influence of literature on, or influence of literature on politics, or the intersection between literature and politics. So he wrote, of course, his work serves as a scholarly benchmark, but you can see it influencing a number of poems. So we can see what's the influence of Du Bois on literature? One, the ideological blueprint. Yeah, Du Bois' concept of double consciousness served as the psychological foundation for Renaissance writers like Langston Hughes, Claude McKay, etc. Yeah, by identifying two-ness of the black experience, Du Bois gave artists a vocabulary to explore the tension between their African heritage and their African American identity. So this second site allowed Harlem elite to critique Western civilization while simultaneously demanding a seat at its table. And later on, I want to look at poems like I Too by Langston Hughes. I want you to look at poems like If We Must Die by Claude McKay, poems like I Shall Return by Claude McKay. They were very political. And Claude McKay really took the spirit of Du Bois, quite combative, and Du Bois did not compromise around, with racism, He was very blunt, and he used to say actually there is no brotherhood between the white race and black race, because of course he was not as radical as Malcolm X, because Malcolm X even wanted to have an armed resistance, armed struggle against whites in America. But Malcolm X was not the same generation with Du Bois. The same generation of Du Bois was Booker Washington. But of course, Du Bois was more intellectual, but to a great extent, he also encouraged education for Black people. Education for Black people. So, ideological blueprint. And let me tell you, ideology is very important. Scholarly works, actually, by writing the souls of Black folk. That is a scholarly blueprint upon which now thinkers or artists now, sprang from there, and they wrote a lot of works because of being inspired by Du Bois. And later on, I think he even had a journal where he used to publish poems, articles, papers. And in one of those journals, that's where he wrote about literature being propaganda, you see? And through that, he was the voice that now inspired new intellectuals to write more against racism and, of course, fight evils in the Black society. Then institutional gatekeeping. So as the editor of The Crisis, yes, he had a magazine called The Crisis. Du Bois acted as the movement most powerful gatekeeper. He used the publication to provide a platform for emerging voices, effectively curating the Renaissance. By publishing the early works of writers such as Conti Cullen and Jean Toomer, Du Bois ensured that Black art was inextricably linked to the struggle for civil rights and social justice. You can see, you can now see. So these are people we need to appreciate. And even if we cannot be great by trying to destroy the names of others. Like some people have tried even to steal the ideas of Du Bois, and they don't recognize him. Like even this question of art is art for art's sake is mere dog shit, as Chinua Achebe says. Chinua Achebe was simply quoting Du Bois. It is Du Bois who actually said that African literature must be concerned about politics. Yeah, they must be concerned about realities on the ground. Although we quote Chinua Achebe, we forget the real person who came up with that. So this was a visionary, yeah. And so he talks about art as propaganda. Du Bois' most controversial influence was his 1926 assertion that all art is propaganda. And very soon we are going to see that now. In the next lecture, we will see how literature can now affect propaganda. And so, as a critique, you as a critique of literature, you need to be very careful to identify where propaganda is being instilled in the audience. Yeah, and that's why literary work should also be approached with a lot of wisdom, and a lot of knowledge, so that again you don't just take everything that comes, because literature is characterized by propaganda. So he rejected the art for art's sake movement, insisting that Black creativity must serve a functional purpose. That, in literature, actually, in Africa, art is functional. It has a role in the society. It has a role to educate the audience. That is what happens in Africa. So dismantle the color line. So literature in Africa must be geared towards dismantling racism, or color line, and restore Black dignity. You see, and restore Black. And how does it? it should be a bit preachy. Like look at the works of Alex Laguma, like in The Fog of the Season's End. Sometimes he just speaks directly to apartheid. Yeah. And that's what we are saying. Literature must have an underlying ideology. Yeah. Where you, like if you, like Ole Kulet is concerned about the rights of women. And he does not care what you say. Hmm? He just goes down, he hits it, he brings it down. Yeah. And even other writers like Buchi Emecheta, and that's what call propaganda in a way. Propaganda you are saying there's an ideology you want to preach to the audience. That's what we are saying. So there is nothing wrong sometimes a writer being a bit preachy. It's just part of literature. It's just a part of literature. It's just we will come to Mikhail Gorbachev and you will see, not Gorbachev, Mikhail Bakhtin, yeah, Bakhtin, and you will see what he says about monologism, yeah, and how, as a writer, there are some things you may want to impose to the audience, yeah, may want to force into the audience because you don't like some of those things, yeah, yeah. So it has a functional purpose. So there is nothing like, I think it is who is this philosopher who talked about all we look for in literature is beauty. There is a philosopher who can remind me. There is I think it's like in session 2, we talked about literature and philosophy. And there is a philosopher who just talked about literature should just be for beauty. I think were they two or three. Um, and just talks about literature for beauty, beauty for its own sake. Um, is who? Um, just forgotten it. I hope I will remember him. I'll remember him. Yeah, that literature is just for beauty, and and that is what Du Bois is against. That there can be no art for art's sake. That literature must eh, have propaganda, and so such writers will even use a lot of authorial intrusion. Authorial intrusion. A writer just intrudes and comments on the story like a grain of wheat. There are many scenes where Mugi just intrudes and comments on the story to as a touch, to control the ideology. There is what he wants to pass to the audience. Although some people think this is very negative, but now have you looked at Black Rain? Anybody who has read Black Rain by Masuji? Anybody who has read Black Rain by Masuji? Anybody who has looked at Black Rain by Masuji? What is the writer's attitude towards the Japanese? Who is blamed for the nuclear bomb? Is it Americans or Japanese leaders? Is it Americans or Japanese leaders? And yet, when you look at this story, the Americans are the one, and in fact, the Japanese were very weak. There was nothing actually to now justify the use of the bomb. So Japan is blamed through and through, and yet the manufacturer of the bomb and the user is not blamed to a great extent. And through that, much as it shows the negative effects of the bomb, the Japanese government is largely blamed. And that is what we call monologism. There is a kind of the narrative is manipulated to do what? To lean against or to be biased against the Japanese regime. Yeah. And that bias is what we are trying to call propaganda. It is monologism. That is monologism, where you want to preach a certain ideology, yeah, to the audience, to inculcate a certain ideology to the audience. Then he talked about the tenth, which you have talked about. So ultimately, Du Bois ensured the Harlem Renaissance was not just a period of beauty in language, but a sophisticated campaign for racial vindication. Then you have Marcus Garvey. So in contrast to Du Bois, Marcus Garvey championed a more inclusive populist movement. So Marcus Garvey was very populist and he was very political. Yeah. So Garvey believed that the fight for African freedom required the participation of Black people, regardless of educational or class status. So Du Bois focused on the talented 10, the educated class who can save Africa. But Marcus said no. All black people, whether poor or rich, they have a responsibility to rise up and fight for the freedom of the race. Yeah. So Marcus Garvey went to South America and many parts of the world and discovered that black people were just slaves in spite of them having a very, very rich continent. And he wanted black people to return to Africa. He even looked for money, hired a ship, and transported the first 400 black intellectuals to Liberia. But then he was betrayed by the president of Liberia. He was betrayed by the president of Liberia, and the ship could not even dock. Yeah. So he was frustrated. The ship was attacked, and on the way back, they sent even bandits to, to attack them. And later on, when he reached America, he was detained between 1923 and 1925, was in prison. So Marcus Garvey was not able to achieve his vision, but he had a vision for black people, and he actually inspired. He's actually the major spirit that inspired Rastafarianism. He was not a Rastafari, but the Rastafaris were inspired by Marcus Garvey's vision for black people, and you see through reggae music and oral performance. So he influenced music or literature in form of music. Yeah. But how did he inspire it? Yeah, it was through his political vision. That's why we are saying there is a nexus between literature and politics. And Gabi was a nemesis to Du Bois. They did not agree on most issues, but the two of them were Pan-Africanists who really championed for the freedom of the black race. But for Gavi mostly, he inspired reggae music, and therefore through the oral performances, yeah, we see the nexus between literature and politics. Rastafarianism is a very political a movement, a very political movement. Although it is religious, but it's very, very political. Then we have Fanon and Wright. So the mid-20th century saw further refinements of these ideas, while Richard Wright leaned toward Du Bois, even dismissing traditional black cultures as obsolete. Yeah, Franz Fanon offered a more nuanced synthesis. Fanon adopted Du Bois' belief that literature must be ideological and confrontational to dismantle the colonial self-hatred. That is Fanon now. And you need to read The Wretched of the Earth. Yeah. So Wretched of the Earth, Fanon is drawing ideas from Du Bois, especially the question of ideology. And literature must have an ideology. So literature can have a political ideology. I want you to know that. And that's why books like Petals of Blood had a lot of political impact because of ideology. Yeah. So Fanon advocated for a hybrid path rather than a totalizing rejection of culture, suggesting that while the artist must attack racist structures, they should also navigate the complexities of modern identity. So according to Fanon, we must also get some good things from Western culture. We should not reject all Western culture. So basically, Fanon stood for a hybrid mix, yeah, a hybrid mix for the development of Africa. And they actually said that as Africa moves forward, the best way is to take good things from Western culture and positive things from African culture. That things like science and technology have to be appreciated, and therefore he opposed negritude. Yeah, that those leaders who think that African culture, national culture is African culture, will be disappointed because the revolution is averse to custom. Revolution is averse to custom, and as the people fight for independence, they are destroying the old structures and establishing new ones through hybridity. And so for him, he was against return to all cultures of the past. He was against that. And in the 1956 conference, he actually opposed what Aimé Césaire was trying to say. According to Aimé Césaire, Western culture has bastardized African culture. And so there is a need for the African people to return to all the cultures of the past. So Aimé Césaire was a radical. And he said that, in fact, a culture cannot be built by cultural hybridity, Because according to him, this hybridity is more of a cultural anarchy because it has been forced upon the people. That the best way to have hybridity is for people to be allowed to intermingle with the culture themselves. But during colonialism, the culture was forced on people. And so what we have in Africa today, according to Cesar, is cultural anarchy. And even he quotes Nietzsche. Yeah, according to Nietzsche, hybridity cannot actually create a good culture. That when you mix the different cultures, you lead to anarchy. And of course, that's what we see also in River Between. Boogie is trying to interrogate the ideas of Cesar and Frantz Fanon in the 1956 conference. That is hybridity plausible. Yeah. So Cesar rejects all this. Um, but as Africa now got independence, it's like the ideas of Frantz Fanon became more relevant because we see today most people are choosing hybridity, but not cultural essentialism, as Aimé Césaire said. So according to Césaire, the art should act as a decolonial healing, forcing a confrontation with the past to enable a dignified future. But if I get time, I'll share with you some of those essays of the 1956 conference, and see what they said. But somebody like Richard Wright was really against African cultures. He even said he thanked the white man for saving him from past African cultures which are primitive. Actually, he used very derogatory terms. Although when you look at Native Son, you see him as a good writer, but he was really against African culture. It's like to him, all African cultures are primitive, and he condemned them. But Cesar was not like that. Cesar says, in fact, people must return to their culture because hybridity is just a mongrel culture that is ascertains what we are calling cultural anarchy. And that's the picture of Aimé Césaire. That is the picture of Aimé Césaire. So maybe before I continue, what do you think about Aimé Césaire and Fanon? Yeah? Should we proceed through a mix or we must return to our cultures? And these things are very political. In fact, Aimé Césaire was a politician. Yeah, he was a leader in Martinique for a very long time. That's why I'm telling you, literature and politics are very much related. And that's why Nietzsche says a writer is a leader. A writer is a leader, and he writes to look for influence. And so Senghor was the president of Senegal, and he was one of the greatest poets we had at independence. Yeah. So Aimé Césaire was a politician. Fanon he did not live long, and maybe if he had lived long, he would have become a politician. He wrote two books that have actually formed the foundation of post-colonial theory. Yes. Comment a bit before you continue. What do you think of Aimé Césaire? Return to the whole culture. And then Fanon says no. Revolution is averse to custom. And as they fight for independence, the people are destroying all structures to replace them with new structures through hybridity. Comment in 2 minutes. I'm waiting for your comment. Sheila, Felix.
Yes, what I can say about, I believe you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes. What I can say about functional hybridity approach
Mm.
uh, is that, for instance, to me, I'll buy from Fanon
Mm-hmm.
than the image deserves idea of returning to the old culture
Mm.
and kicking out the new one because let us look at, for instance, in Kenya.
Mm.
If we look at the problem we have of tribalism,
Yes.
and me, I can say that if we pick from Fanon's idea of hybridity,
Mm.
according to my simple understanding of hybridity, where
Mm.
we mix two different cultures,
Mm.
that is what can explain it. For
Mm.
instance, the intermarriage,
Mm.
where you find a Luo and a mixing, marrying and then producing a hybrid,
Mm.
who is a mixture of a Luo and a Kikuyu, one who brings the two.
Mm.
And this kills the, the tribalism aspect among the two communities who have been having issues since time of independence up to today.
Mm.
So we can model that list from France Fanon, and to me, it's a disease not only to racism but even to tribalism in African countries.
Mm.
But if we look into that idea of Africans returning to the old culture
Mm.
and taking out because we can't say that these are the new the new cultures we acquired as Africans,
Mm.
maybe from the West or from other, even from the Asian, all negative. And in fact,
Mm.
there are some other African cultures which we need to look into
Mm.
and do away with, just like the way we can, like collect swap, blossoms of the savannah. There are some aspects is trying to is trying to condemn.
Mm.
Just even like a court subject song of Lawino where he's condemning the extortion of men through
Mm.
marriages. Uh, I think was that no, that is the river between. I think you know the between the one where you see there's a way in which there's a character whose marriage becomes very simple. So I'll pick. I'm building on Franz Fanon's hybridity. To me, that the marks the best because if you move back to the pure, keeping out the new cultures and maintaining the African culture to identify our roots,
Mm.
there are other aspects of the African culture again which we need to look and take out. So
Mm.
therefore, the best philosophy to mirror approach to me is that of Franz Fanon's hybridity.
Yes. And actually, most of
Yes.
yeah, actually his ideas have been very influential, very influential. I think he was very realistic because most of what he said is happening in Africa today. Uh, is happening in Africa today. Sheila, maybe are you able, or the network is still having issues? You able to comment something before we continue? Sheila? Sheila, are you able to comment something on Aimé Césaire and Fanon and Du Bois? And most of these people are Pan-Africanists. And you can see those ideas are very political, very political. So literature has a nexus with politics. Literature has a nexus with the politics. Um, she's saying she cannot unmute. What's the problem? Is it your phone? She's saying she cannot unmute. Um, all right. So now then we have another theory called Afropolitanism. um, and the notion of the link to the homeland. So they say for them, they don't believe in the roots. When you look at Pan-Africanists like Marcus Garvey, there's another one called Edward Blyden, whom I did not mention, but he was is considered the first prophet of the Negro Renaissance. Edward Blyden lived in the 1860s during the days of Abraham Lincoln, and he moved from US and went to Liberia. And um, Blyden talked about the European personality and the African personality. But one of the things he said is that Africans are not Europeans in waiting, that Africans are different from the European race, that the African personality is sympathetic, warm, and more artistic and spiritual. Yeah. But the European race is a bit logical, a bit colors, and is more concerned about science, very competitive, and more concerned about science than spirituality. And then he said that Africans had have a culture and they can build it if they return to Africa and build their homeland. So he also emphasized the question of the return to Africa. And that's why he moved from US to Liberia. So he's one of those again who inspired even people like Du Bois. But for him, he was very religious. He used to be a Christian, but he also embraced Islam. And people criticized him for embracing Islam and all that. Now, when it comes to Afropolitanism, now they say this is a new fashion for Pan-Africanism, but when you look at its tenets, it is not true. It's a theory on its own, on its own. So it's a contemporary framework of African identity that emphasizes transnationalism, mobility, cultural hybridity, and cultural hybridity. Yeah. So they emphasize these three, but they don't believe on the root. They don't believe in the homeland, that you must return to your homeland. No, they believe in a link, that an African has only a link to the homeland, but not a root. So you don't need to return to your mother nation. Yeah? They believe home is anywhere you find peace, and through hybridity, you are able to influence new people and help even fellow Africans to move to other places as long as you improve your class issues and all that. So, so it was coined by Taye Selassie and later theorized by Achille Mbembe. These are very important scholars. The term describes a generation of Africans who are at home in multiple global metropolises. For example, Lagos, London, New York. They believe you can fit anywhere. You don't need to go back home. This is the picture of Taye Selassie. She wrote a novel called Ghana Must Go, and it's one of the major novels. When you read it, you understand Afropolitanism very, very well. Actually, I've written a full book on this. My book was a response to Selassie and Achille Mbembe and other Afropolitanists. Yeah, it is entitled um, "Come Back, Baba." If I get time, I will show you the cover. And so Selassie theorized this, and so she offers a radical departure from Pan-Africanism by explicitly rejecting race-based politics. They believe that race does not really matter. She argues that blackness is a byproduct of outdated political philosophies that fail to account for the modern reality of racial mixing and global mobility. So for Selassie, the Pan-African tendency to essentialize or treat Black identity as a singular, uniform experience is flawed. They believe the issue of race is very flawed. She highlights a new class of Afropolitan citizens, biracial individuals, and middle-class immigrants who navigate global cities from Lagos to London with equal fluency. So in this view, the focus should shift from racial identity to class and shared human experiences, utilizing a hybrid spaces to foster global citizenship. So they believe in global citizenship. They talk of global, they talk about digital citizenship and all that. So they don't believe in race. That the whole question of race, that in fact most of them they don't feel black. Yeah, so so some of them even say they don't feel black. Yeah, that black, the whole question of race is a myth. So they deny race. They deny race, and especially Selassie is very passionate about that. So Achille Mbembe provides a more moderate definition of Afropolitanism. He views it not as a denial of African roots. So Selassie denies the question of roots, yeah, and all we need is a link, yeah, and even blackness is just a perspective. It is not a fact, yeah, that is not a fact. So Mbembe criticizes Pan-Africanism for its perceived culture of victimhood. So according to Mbembe, that we are always lamenting. Yeah, so Mbembe and Gikandi argue that when we keep talking about colonialism and how we suffered, that is Afro-pessimism, and we need to stop, talking about victimhood and work hard and start winning. Yeah, winning. Be optimistic and hopeful about life. Yeah. So Afropolitanism empowers Black people, according to Mbembe, to take agency over their own challenges. We should not continue that crying about how we were colonized. Yeah. So the text notes a critical gap in Mbembe's theory, while he urges Africans to recognize the other. That is now my text. Yeah. That while Mbembe urges Africans to recognize the whites, yeah, within the continent, yeah, Mbembe is less vocal about demanding that global North, yeah, ceases its racial stigmatization. Now, the problem with Afropolitanism, when blacks are being oppressed, yeah, like George Floyd, yeah, they don't come out, yeah, to fight for racial justice. But they always blame black people for being pessimistic and complaining, just the way Trump likes saying that we are just always complaining and doing nothing. But Trump, he can say that because his race has never suffered slavery and colonialism. So when we talk about the ills of colonialism, that is not Afro-pessimism. That's what I believe, and that's where I interrogate. I disagree with Afropolitanism. Yeah. We cannot deny black identity. Blackness is not an opinion. It is a fact. Yeah. When you look at your mirror and you see your blackness, eh, that is a heritage. And personally, I don't believe that we can deny blackness the way Selassie says. So I wrote a full book where I compared Pan-Africanism and Afropolitanism, and I interrogated Mbembe and Selassie's views on their attempt to do what? To destroy or to limit the influence, their attempt to cast aspersions at the achievements and attainments of Pan-Africanism. So they claim that they are the same, but they are not. In fact, there are two different theories. They are not the same. Afropolitanism is not an improved version of Pan-Africanism, no. Because while Pan-Africanists will fight against racial injustices, yeah, you will see these people, in fact, blaming Afropolitanists will just sit there and start blaming Pan-Africanists. And yet they do nothing to fight against racial injustices in the United States and other places where there is a racial prejudice against Black people. So, what are the four tenets or five tenets of Afropolitanism? One, transnational mobility. Afropolitans are defined by their roots and roots. Yeah, yeah, they are always migrating. Identity is not fixed to a single soil. That's what they say. Yeah, but it's shaped by movement between African cities. But when you look at like among the Maasai, that's why they look at Ole Kaelo as a caste person because he has just been moving all over, but he does not have a stable home. So in most African cultures, when you behave this way, this transnational mobility in most African cultures, they will say you are a caste. Yeah, yeah, and that's where to a great extent I agree with Pan-Africanism. We need a base. You cannot have a digital nation. That's what the Gen Zs are trying to say. We are tribeless. We are what? There is nothing like a digital nation. A nation must have land. Yeah, a nation must have land for you to be respected. If you are just moving from one place to another, you don't have any roots. You will not be respected. You will not, and that's why, to a great extent, I disagree with some tenets of Afropolitanism. Yeah, so identity is not fixed. That's what they believe. but is shaped by movement between African cities and global metropolises. Personally, that's not an achievement. Africa needs to have a civilization so that we are counted among nations, improve our land, settle in our land, and develop it. And that's why I agree with Blyden, I agree with Marcus Garvey, and that's why we were able to win independence. And now Africa is somewhere moving. But we cannot just be moving, working for people, move from one nation to another, and then argue that that is a philosophy we can live by. And when Selassie even comes up with a theory, he's actually in a club, just in a club, and he sees people dancing, others kissing there from different races, and then she gets inspired and write a story called Bye Bye Baba. So, and people are even asking, club life, yeah, this Sex and the City kind of ideology is not a serious ideology upon which African people can place their hopes. There's a writer who actually criticizes Selassie. We cannot just use such. We cannot play around with things like Pan-Africanism, which enabled Africa to attain independence from colonialism, and we are now dignified people seated on the table at the United Nations like any other nation in the world. It's not a mean achievement, and we cannot just start now trying to negate the benefits or the merits of Pan-Africanism at the expense of a philosophy that was just inspired by some whimsical kind of thinking. So we need to a great extent, me, I'm a Pan-Africanist. Um, I think I'm a Pan-Africanist. I may not be fully for some aspects of Pan-Africanism, like Aimé Césaire, the way Felix said, but I think even Fanon was a Pan-Africanist. Yeah, he was he stood for cultural hybridity, but he was a Pan-Africanist, a very serious Pan-Africanist. Not this kind of jokes. We can travel, we can get jobs, but that should not give us a moral license to deny our Black identity. And however much we pretend we are a Black, and that is our heritage. Yeah, that is our heritage, and we should be proud of what God made us to be. Yeah. So then, cultural ability. This tenet rejects nativist and the demand for cultural purity. Of course, they are against cultural essentialism and they want cultural mix. Then, urbanity and cosmopolitanism. They like city life, and they move from one city to another. So basically, these are people of a higher class. And that's why they look at ideas Pan-Africans ideas as backward, because most Afropolitanists, most of them are biracials and have grown up in cities. And you can see even Selassie gets inspired in a club, yeah, and that's where she gets the first thoughts to invent Pan-Africanism. But you see, even as she talks about education, these are educated people. They move from one place to another. They have no tribe. Um, but look at Du Bois. He was the first person to get a PhD, but he still identified with his race. Yeah. So that's why personally I don't believe in this. But you read it, and then you will tell me what you think. So rejection of victimhood. So according to Achille Mbembe, we should not always complain. Politics of grievance. We should not always complain about racism. But I remember people like Jomo Kenyatta saying, we should not forget where we came from. Huh? We forgive them, but we should not forget that these people enslaved us. And sometimes the past enables us to think about the future. Then the frivolity of race. Thinkers like Taye suggest that blackness is a limiting political construct. So Afropolitanism often de-emphasizes race in favor of class, profession, and shared global humanism. So they say it is class that matters. It is not race. Then anti-Afro pessimism. I've talked about that. But we should not always be negative. That we should not always be negative. So you will find the book on the portal. You will find Americanah. I've given a synopsis, and you are supposed to look at the tenets of Afropolitanism and Pan-Africanism in Americanah, in Adichie's Americanah. I think I will look for an assignment for you. I'll tell you which assignment to do, not this one. I think I'll look at the previous submissions and then tell you which assignment to do for this particular unit. Yeah, so that's the end of my lecture on the intersection between literature and politics. And we focused on Pan-Africanism and Afropolitanism. And our book here is Americanah. But also, we'll look at Ghana Must Go by Selassie. That's another one. I've also read it, and I saw a lot of the question of the return and onward migration. Kweku, one of the major characters, goes to the US and decides to settle there. But even the same book, as much as Selassie is trying to talk about onward migration, just settling where you want, we find the Kweku suffering a lot, suffering a lot. It's a lot of racism. He loses his land. He's sacked, and he refuses to return home. But in Americana, Ifemelu returns back to Nigeria to prove what Du Bois and Marcus Garvey and also what Blyden said. So we need to build Africa. For Pan-Africanism, return is very important. Even if we work outside there, we must return home and build our ancestral homeland. So the book is Americana. You may look at a few of its pages and you do some work there. Any question? Now, I will extend the signing of the attendance for Sheila. And Sheila, I want you to strive until you sign the attendance today, because this is the fourth week. I don't know if the other weeks you will be allowed because it is gone. But from today, I am happy for Felix for what he has done. Every lesson we attend, we must sign there. We can use Zoom. Zoom is very easy. But go back to the photo because the attendance is another thing altogether. And Felix has tried to do it. So you can ask Felix. Felix, you can guide her to see, what you did so that we sign attendance every week. Yeah, because it's getting serious. For our course to be taken seriously, for Commission of University of Education to say that this is good quality learning, they must see attendance, they must see content. That's why I'm submitting content of the portal every week. They must see the link for the class there. Yeah? And they must also see what. There are several things they look for, and one of it is whether the students have signed the attendance. And see, if by the ninth week you have not signed any attendance, it means you cannot do any exam. Yeah? It means you cannot, because according to Moot, you should at least attend 75% of the classes. And as long as you have not signed that attendance, and at least now you are enrolled, we are happy. Yeah. But also go there, find time, you go to the portal. When I check in the portal, none of you has ever accessed the portal. None. We can just see from our end. Once, technology, hakuna mambo ya kuficha. For us to prove that you have learned, there must be attendance and students have signed. There must be content on the portal. None. And there are other links. I can share the videos there. I can also share even the PowerPoint slides. There are places where I can share the PowerPoint slides so that everything is done on the portal. Yeah. So that when the Commission of University Education comes, it's able to, yeah, you have raised your hand, Sheila.
I don't know how, but I've accessed the portal before. Now I have been signing my attendance from last week.
You have been signing.
I signed last week.
But when I checked, there was nothing. Yeah. When I checked.
Well, but I signed.
You signed?
Yes.
And today, have you been able to access?
Yes, I have.
Pardon?
Yes, I have, sir.
Have you signed?
I have signed.
You have signed today?
Yes.
Okay, let me check and see if you have signed. Yeah, so we need to sign. we need to sign so that we do the right thing. Yeah, so any question? Any other question? Yeah, so next week tomorrow you will present the one on Proverbs, and I will also give you an assignment for next week to present for cell 801. Thank you for attending. And tuendelee hivyo. Asanteni sana. Let's not give up. Asanteni sana.